You just stole our lake. The woman's voice cut through the evening air like a blade, sharp enough to make heads turn from 3 houses down. I stood there on the gravel shore of Old Mill Lake, folder tucked under my arm, watching 30 people form a half-circle around me while 2 patrol cars pulled up with lights flashing. The HOA president pointed at the small metal sign I'd just installed, private property, county deed on file, and her face went crimson. Behind her, smartphones rose like a jury of eyes, all recording. I didn't move. I didn't explain. I just waited for the deputy to ask the question I knew was coming, because I had an answer nobody expected. Comment below if you've ever dealt with an HOA. This story gets wild. It was 6:45 on a Thursday evening, and the sun hung low enough to turn the lake's surface into a sheet of copper. I'd driven out here with a toolbox, the metal sign, and a stack of documents in a brown folder. The plan was simple: install the sign, take photos, and head home. What I got instead was Diane Pritchard, HOA president, marching down the dirt path with 15 neighbors in tow, all of them looking at me like I'd just set fire to the community center. She wore a navy blazer over a white blouse, and her voice carried the certainty of someone who'd never been told no. "This is community property," she said, stopping 10 feet from me. "You can't just block access to our lake." I glanced at the sign I'd mounted on a wooden post near the water's edge, 12 by 18 inches, powder-coated steel with clean black lettering. It didn't scream. It stated a fact. But facts didn't matter much to people who had been using something for 40 years without asking permission. The crowd behind Diane grew as more residents trickled down from the street. Some had their arms crossed. Others held their phones at eye level, recording. A woman in yoga pants whispered something to the man beside her. A teenager in a basketball jersey stood with his hands in his pockets, watching me with the kind of suspicion that comes from hearing only one side of a story. The energy wasn't quite hostile yet, but it was close. One wrong word, one hint of arrogance, and this crowd would turn. Deputy Wade Fletcher arrived first, stepping out of his patrol car with the measured calm of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He was mid-30s, clean-shaven, with the kind of neutral expression cops wear when they don't yet know which side requires paperwork. "Evening, folks," he said, scanning the group. "What's going on here?" Diane turned to him like she'd been waiting for reinforcements. "This man has blocked access to our community lake. We've used this property for decades. He has no right." Fletcher looked at me. I nodded once and held up the folder. "Deputy, I'm the legal owner of this property. I have documentation." Fletcher's eyes flicked to the sign, then back to me. "Can I see that documentation?" I opened the folder and handed him 3 sheets, each one protected in a clear plastic sleeve. The first was the deed of sale from First National Bank, dated 3 months prior, with the property description clearly marked: Old Mill Lake and surrounding parcel, total acreage 4.2, county record number CR 1948-0847. The second was a certificate of water rights issued by the county recorder. The third was a property survey completed by a licensed county engineer, showing the lake boundary entirely within the parcel I'd purchased. Fletcher took his time reading. I watched his jaw tighten slightly as he scanned the county stamps and legal descriptions. Behind him, Diane shifted her weight from one foot to the other, impatient. Someone in the crowd muttered, "This is ridiculous." Another voice said, "He can't do this." Diane stepped closer, her voice rising. "That doesn't matter. We have easement rights. 40 years of public use means something under the law." I turned to her, keeping my tone even. "Easement requires a recorded agreement. Do you have one?" She blinked. "We don't need a recorded agreement. This is prescriptive easement." I shook my head. Prescriptive easement has 5 requirements under state law: hostile use, continuous use, open and notorious use, exclusive use, and statutory period. You fail on at least 3. But even if you didn't, it still needs to be recorded with the county. Is it? Silence. Fletcher handed the documents back to me. "Sir, these look legitimate. Do you have any objection to me verifying them with the county?" "None at all," I said. "The county recorder's office has everything on file." Fletcher pulled out his phone, stepped away, and made the call. The crowd waited. I stayed where I was, folder tucked back under my arm. I didn't need to defend myself yet. The documents did that. What I needed was patience. A man in a grey polo shirt leaned toward Diane and whispered something. She shook her head sharply. Fletcher returned after about 90 seconds. The county confirms the deed is recorded. The property is privately owned. Diane's face went from red to white. That's impossible. Fletcher held up a hand. If there's a dispute over easement rights, that's a civil matter. But as of right now, this gentleman has legal title. One of the residents, an older man with thinning hair and a faded ball cap, stepped forward. Deputy, we've been fishing here since the 80s. You're saying we just lost that? Fletcher's expression softened slightly. I'm saying if there's no recorded easement, access is at the owner's discretion. That's how property law works. The old man looked at me, shook his head, and walked back toward the street. The crowd began to thin. Smartphones lowered. Diane, however, wasn't done. She pulled out her phone and tapped furiously. Within 2 minutes, a second patrol car arrived, and Sheriff Dale Merrick stepped out. Merrick was older than Fletcher, early 50s, with grey creeping into his sideburns and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen too many small-town disputes turn stupid. He walked over, listened to Fletcher's summary, then looked at me. You're the new owner? He asked. I am. And you're blocking community access. I'm enforcing my property rights, I said. There's no recorded easement. I checked. Merrick studied me for a long moment, then turned to Diane. Do you have documentation of an easement? She hesitated. We have historical use. Photos. Testimonies. That's not a recorded easement, Merrick said. If you want to challenge this, you'll need to go through the courts. But right now, this man has legal title, and unless you can show me a recorded easement, he's within his rights to restrict access. Diane's lips pressed into a thin line. This isn't over. Merrick nodded. I'm sure it's not, but for tonight, it is. Everyone needs to clear out. The crowd dispersed slowly, some muttering, others silent. Diane shot me one last look before turning and walking back up the path. The noise faded. Car doors slammed in the distance. Engines started. Within minutes, the only sound left was water lapping against the shore and my own breathing. I'd won the first round, but the tightness in my chest told me this was just the opening act. Fletcher lingered near his patrol car, and I saw him turn back toward the lake, his gaze settling on something near the water's edge. I followed his line of sight to a large moss-covered stone half buried in the dirt. Old carvings marked its surface, weathered by decades of rain and neglect. Fletcher stared at it longer than seemed necessary, then looked back at me. Sir, he said quietly, is that the 1948 marker? I nodded. His jaw tightened again, and for the first time that evening, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. You might want to look up County Record 1948, he said. There's something you should know. Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and walked back to his patrol car. The lake was quiet now, just me and the sound of water lapping against the shore. I walked over to the stone and crouched down, brushing away some of the moss with my hand. The carving was clearer up close, CR48 etched deep into the granite with a small symbol beneath it, an eagle's head, the old logo of the county engineer's office. Below that, barely visible, was another line of text, almost completely obscured by lichen. I pulled out my phone and used the flashlight to illuminate it. Federal property transferred, 1952. I stood up slowly, the words echoing in my head. Federal property. That meant this lake had a history beyond what the bank had disclosed, beyond what the HOA knew, maybe even beyond what the county remembered. I took a photo of the stone, then another of the sign, and one more wide shot of the lake itself. The light was fading fast now. I walked back to my truck, set the folder on the passenger seat, and sat behind the wheel for a moment, thinking. Fletcher's warning replayed in my mind. Something you should know. He'd recognized the marker. He knew something about 1948, something he couldn't or wouldn't say in front of Diane and the others. That meant there were layers to this dispute I hadn't uncovered yet. And if I wanted to hold this property, I'd need to dig deeper. I started the engine and pulled onto the gravel road. Behind me, Old Mill Lake disappeared into the dusk, keeping its secrets for now. But I'd be back. 72 hours before Diane Pritchard accused me of theft in front of 30 witnesses, I sat in a windowless conference room at First National Bank, staring at a stack of documents 3 inches thick. The air smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee, Across the table sat Clifton Hayes, a loan officer in his late 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of slow, deliberate movements that come from decades of signing other people's futures away. He pushed the stack toward me with both hands. "This is everything," he said. "Title history, surveys, previous liens, the works. It's all clean now, but I'll be honest with you, Mr. Holloway, nobody's wanted this property for a long time." I flipped open the top folder and scanned the first page. Old Mill Lake, 4.2 acres, including water rights and surrounding land. The price was lower than I'd expected, almost suspiciously low for waterfront property. "Why not?" I asked. Clifton shifted in his chair. "It's complicated," he said. "The original owner defaulted back in 1987. The bank took possession, but there were some questions about access rights. We tried selling it twice. Both deals fell through." I leaned forward. "What kind of questions?" He exhaled through his nose. "HOA claims. Easement disputes. Nothing formal, just noise. But enough noise to scare off buyers." I set the folder down. "Is there a recorded easement?" Clifton hesitated, then shook his head. "No. We checked. The county recorder has nothing on file. But the HOA has been using the lake for decades, and they act like they own it." I pulled the second folder toward me and found a photocopy of an old survey map, faded and barely legible. Someone had drawn a line in blue ink across the lake's eastern edge with the words "Public Access Easement," but the line was crossed out with a thick black X. In the margin, almost hidden, someone had written in pencil, "See Federal Waterway Plan 1948. I tapped the note. "What's this?" Clifton leaned over to look. "Oh, that. Yeah, there's some old federal history with this property. Back in the 1940s, the lake was part of a military water reserve project. When the project got scrapped, the land reverted to the county, and they sold it to a private owner in 1953. I studied the faded stamp, Federal Waterway Commission, declassified 1952. So the lake was federal property. Clifton nodded. "For about 4 years. But that's ancient history. It's been private for over 70 years. I wasn't so sure, but I didn't say that. Instead, I flipped through the rest of the documents. Everything looked legitimate. The deed was clean. The water rights were transferable. The only red flag was the ghost of an easement that had never been recorded. What about the HOA? I asked. Have they ever filed a claim? Clifton shook his head. Not officially. They send letters every few years, but nothing that goes anywhere. The last time was 2003. Bank counsel replied that without a recorded easement, they had no standing. I closed the folder and sat back. This wasn't just a property transaction. It was a decades-old standoff that nobody had been willing to resolve. But the price was right, and the paperwork was solid. I'll take it, I said. Clifton blinked. You sure? Because once you sign, you're buying into all of this. I met his gaze. I'm sure. 2 days later, I drove to the county recorder's office, a squat brick building with a parking lot full of potholes. The clerk at the front desk, Jolene Sutton, looked up when I walked in. Help you? I set my folder on the counter. I need to verify property records. Old Mill Lake, County Record CR 1948-0847. Jolene's fingers moved across the keyboard, and a few seconds later she nodded. Got it. What do you need? I pulled out the deed. I just purchased this property. I want to confirm there's no recorded easement. She scanned the deed, then turned back to her screen. After a moment, she shook her head. No easement on file. Property's been private since 1953. I felt the tension in my shoulders ease. What about the HOA? Have they ever tried to record an easement? Jolene's expression shifted slightly. They've asked multiple times, but you can't record an easement without proof of agreement from the property owner. She pulled up another screen. Actually, there's a note here from County Council, 1985. Says the HOA inquired about access rights and council advised them their claim was unfounded. I leaned closer. Can I get a copy of that? She disappeared into a back room and returned with a single sheet of paper, a scanned memo on county letterhead dated April 9, 1985. The subject line read Old Mill Lake Access Inquiry. The body was short and unambiguous. HOA claims of prescriptive easement are without merit. The property has maintained continuous private ownership since 1953. No public access authorized. I folded the memo and tucked it into my folder. The HOA had known for 40 years that they had no legal claim, and they'd kept using the lake anyway. I drove out to the lake for the first time as its legal owner. The access road was narrow and lined with overgrown brush. When I reached the shore, I parked and stepped out. The water was still, dark green near the edges. It was quiet in a way that felt almost fragile. I walked along the bank and found the stone almost immediately, half buried near the water's edge, covered in moss. I crouched down and brushed the growth away. The carving was deep, CR 48. Below it, the eagle's head symbol. I pulled out my phone and took photos from different angles. About 20 feet away, half hidden in weeds, I saw something wooden. I pushed through the brush and found an old sign, rotted and covered in moss, lying face down. I flipped it over carefully, and the painted letters were still legible. Old Mill Lake, County Reserve, estimated 1948. I took more photos. This wasn't just history. It was evidence. I pulled out my phone. I had one more stop, the county archive. The building was older than the recorder's office, a grey stone structure with narrow windows. Inside, the air was cool and dry. A man in his 70s sat behind a desk. "Help you?" His voice was rough. "I'm looking for records on Old Mill Lake," I said. "Federal ownership between 1948 and 1952. The man nodded slowly. "Federal Waterway Project. Yeah, we've got that. Nobody's asked for it in years." He led me through a hallway to a basement archive room lined with metal shelves. He climbed a stepladder and retrieved a folder so old the edges had turned brown. He handed it to me carefully. "You can look at it here. No photos without permission." I opened the folder on a long table. Inside were maps, memos, and project proposals, all stamped declassified. The first document was a planning memo dated June 1948, outlining a proposal to convert Old Mill Lake into an emergency water reserve for a military installation. The project was cancelled in 1952. The lake was transferred back to county ownership with explicit instructions. No public easement unless recorded. I read that line 3 times. No public easement unless recorded. It was right there, from the federal government. The HOA had never had a claim. I closed the folder, thanked the archivist, and walked back out into the daylight. The pieces were falling into place. I knew what I had. I knew what they didn't. And I knew exactly what I needed to do next. 48 hours after I bought the lake, I went back to the county archive building with a notebook, a digital camera, and a growing suspicion that what I'd purchased was more complicated than Clifton Hayes had let on. The archivist, Marvin Caldwell, remembered me. He looked up from his paperback when I walked in and said, "Federal Waterway file again." I shook my head. "Everything you have on Old Mill Lake. All of it." Marvin stood slowly and led me back down to the basement archive, past rows of metal shelving, and stopped at a section marked Property Records, 1940 to 1960. He pulled out 3 boxes and set them on the table. "This is everything that didn't get digitized," he said. "You want copies, you let me know." I opened the first box. Inside were manila folders stuffed with documents, all yellowed with age. The top folder was labeled Old Mill Lake Federal Waterway Project 1948 to 1952. But beneath it were others: County Water Rights Transfer 1953, HOA Correspondence 1975 to 2005, and Legal Opinions 1985 to 2003. I pulled out the HOA Correspondence folder first. It was thick, at least 50 pages. The earliest letter was dated September 1975, from Willow Creek Homeowners Association, requesting that the county recognize a public easement based on continuous community use since 1960. The county's response was precise: no easement exists. The property is privately owned. Access is at the discretion of the property owner. I flipped through the rest of the folder. The pattern repeated every few years. The HOA would claim access rights. The county would reply with the same answer: no easement, private property. But the tone of the HOA letters changed over time. By the mid-80s, they weren't asking anymore. They were asserting. A letter from 1983 declared that the HOA had established prescriptive easement through decades of uninterrupted use. The County Council's response was blunt: "Your claim is unfounded. Prescriptive easement requires hostile use against the owner's interest. The property has been bank-owned and unused. Your use was permissive at best. No easement exists." I photographed every page. The HOA had been told repeatedly that they had no claim, and they'd kept using the lake anyway. The second box contained maps. The oldest was hand-drawn, dated 1948, with the lake labelled Emergency Water Reserve, Federal Jurisdiction. A red stamp read Declassified 1952, transferred to county ownership. The next map, dated 1953, showed the lake as private property, no public access. Someone had drawn a line along the eastern shore and written Proposed Easement Denied by County Board the 3rd of December, 53. The HOA had asked for access in 53, right after the property went private, and was denied then too. I photographed every map, every notation, every stamp. The third box contained memos from County Council. A memo from 1992 advised the bank to install signage and restrict access to avoid adverse possession claims. Another from 2001 warned the HOA that continued use without permission constitutes trespass. I sat back, the weight of what I was reading settling over me. The HOA hadn't just been wrong. They'd been told they were wrong, in writing, for decades, and they'd ignored every warning. I closed the boxes. "Marvin," I said, "can I get copies of all of this?" He nodded. "Couple hours. Copier's slow." 2 hours later, I walked out with a flash drive containing scanned copies of 147 pages. I sat in my truck and plugged it into my laptop. I had everything I needed to prove ownership, but I needed evidence of current trespass. I needed cameras. I drove to a hardware store and bought 3 trail cameras, motion-activated and weatherproof. I also bought a lockbox, mounting brackets, and camouflage netting. By the time I got back to the lake, the sun was dropping toward the horizon. I carried the equipment down on foot. The first camera went on a tree near my private property sign, angled to capture anyone who approached. The second went on a branch overlooking the stone marker. The third I mounted near the water's edge, aimed at the main footpath. I powered them on, checked the angles on my phone, and wrapped each unit in netting. Unless someone knew where to look, they'd never see them. I drove home, uploaded the camera software, and set alerts for motion detection. Then I opened the scanned files and read through them again, taking notes. The federal documents established that the lake had never been public. The county memos confirmed the HOA had been repeatedly denied. It was airtight. But one document kept pulling me back, an email, printed and filed, dated October 2003. The sender was V. Ashford. The recipient was the HOA board. The subject line read, "I can't be part of this anymore." The body was short but devastating. "I've served on this board for 5 years, and I can no longer ignore what we are doing. We know the lake isn't ours. County Council told us in 1985. Our own lawyer told us in 2001. We've been lying to homeowners, collecting fees for lake maintenance, and pretending we have legal standing when we don't. I'm resigning effective immediately." The email was signed, Vernon Ashford, Treasurer. A former board member who had walked away because he couldn't stomach the lie. If he was still alive, he might talk. He might have records. I searched the county property database and found him in minutes. He owned a house 15 miles outside the HOA boundaries. I wrote down the address. The next morning, I checked the camera alerts. 3 notifications. I opened the app and played the videos. The first was from 2:30 a.m. 2 figures in dark hoodies approached my sign, yanked it off the post, and tossed it into the brush. The second video showed them at the stone marker. One crouched down, pulled out a hammer, and struck the carving repeatedly. The third captured them leaving. I saved all 3 videos, backed them up to 2 cloud accounts, and tagged each file with date, time, and GPS coordinates. They'd removed my sign. They'd tried to destroy evidence. And they'd done it on camera. I opened my email and drafted a message to Claire Donovan, the county attorney whose name I'd found in the legal opinions. Subject line, Old Mill Lake, trespass and property damage. I attached the videos, the federal documents, the county memos, and Vernon's email. Then I wrote, "I need to speak with you as soon as possible." I hit send. 2 hours later, my phone rang. 36 hours after I sent the email to Claire Donovan, I drove back out to Old Mill Lake with a new sign, heavier this time, made of powder-coated aluminum with bolts instead of screws. The morning air was cool and quiet. I carried the sign down on foot with a cordless drill, a level, and a printed copy of my deed. When I reached the shore, I found the old wooden post still standing. The sign itself was gone, tossed into the brush. I drilled the new sign into place, checking it with the level. This one read, Private Property, County Deed on File. And below that, Public Inquiries, County Recorder's Office, record CR 1948-0847. I stepped back and took a photo, then walked over to the stone marker. Someone had chipped at the letters, but the damage was superficial. CR 48 was still legible, and so was the eagle emblem. I brushed away the loose fragments. The cameras were still recording, their green lights blinking behind the netting. No new alerts since the vandalism 2 nights ago. At 10:15, I heard voices. I looked up and saw Diane Pritchard leading about 15 people down the path. She wore the same navy blazer, clipboard under her arm. Behind her, 2 men carried a large wooden sign painted green with white letters, Community Lake, 40 years of public use. They set it down near the water and started digging holes for the posts. I walked toward them. Morning, I said. Diane turned. Mr. Holloway, we are exercising our rights. I glanced at their sign. What rights are those? She held out a printed page. Adverse possession. Prescriptive easement. 40 years of continuous use. You can't erase that with a piece of paper. I took the sheet. It was a printout from a legal website outlining prescriptive easement requirements. You're right, I said. Prescriptive easement is real, but it has 5 requirements. I held up my fingers as I spoke. Hostile use, but your correspondence shows you asked county permission in 75. That's not hostile. Continuous use, but the lake was abandoned when the bank owned it. That breaks continuity. Open and notorious, you've got that one. Exclusive use, but trespassers and others used it too. That's not exclusive. And statutory period. Even if you met all 4, which you don't, you still need to record the easement. Did you? Diane's jaw tightened. We don't need to record it. The law recognizes prescriptive rights through use alone. I shook my head. Not in this state. State Code 184.32. Easement requires recorded agreement. Unrecorded claims are void. I showed her the statute on my phone. One of the men holding the sign looked at Diane. Is that true? She didn't answer. We'll let the courts decide. I nodded. That's fine. But until then, this is private property, and you're trespassing. Her face flushed. We have a lawyer. A black sedan pulled up, and a man in a dark suit stepped out. He was mid-50s, silver-haired, confident stride. He walked down carrying a leather briefcase. Ms. Pritchard, he said, then turned to me. You must be Mr. Holloway. I'm Russell Blackwell, attorney for the HOA. He extended his hand. I shook it. Mr. Holloway, Russell said, my client believes they have established rights through custom and practice. I met his gaze. Custom isn't law. Show me the recorded easement. Russell's expression didn't change. Prescriptive easement doesn't require recording at the time of use. I pulled the deed from my pocket. This property has been privately owned since '53. The federal government transferred it to the county with explicit instructions. No public easement unless recorded. Your client has been told multiple times by county council they have no claim. I have the memos. I have 147 pages of documentation proving they knew. Russell's jaw tightened. If you have documentation, we'll review it in discovery. But my client intends to continue using this property. I shook my head. No, they don't. Because if they do, I'll file for an injunction and ask for damages for every day of continued trespass. Russell studied me, then glanced at Diane. There was frustration in that look, like he was realizing she hadn't told him everything. Ms. Pritchard, can I speak with you? They stepped away, voices low. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw Diane's hands moving, defensive. Russell's expression grew harder. While they talked, The two men holding the community lake sign looked at each other, then let it go. The sign toppled into the dirt. By the time Russell and Diane returned, the crowd was drifting back toward the street. Russell's face was composed but tense. "Mr. Holloway, we'll be filing a prescriptive easement claim in court. You'll be served within 10 days. I nodded. "I'll be ready." Russell turned and walked away. Diane hesitated, looked at the fallen sign, then at me. "This isn't over." I didn't respond. She left. I stood there after they'd gone, listening to car doors and engines. Then I walked over to the community lake sign and leaned it against a tree. I wasn't going to destroy it, but I wasn't leaving it where they'd put it. I called Claire Donovan. She answered immediately. "Mr. Holloway, I got your email and the videos." Her voice was crisp. "I need you to come in. 2 p.m., County Council office." I looked at my watch. 10:45. "I'll be there." I hung up and took one last look at the lake. Then I heard footsteps. Deputy Wade Fletcher walked down the path alone, hands in his pockets. He stopped and looked at the signs, then at me. "Heard there was activity out here." I nodded. HOA tried to install their own sign. I explained the law. They left. Fletcher's expression was unreadable. "You know they're not going to stop." I met his gaze. "I know." He glanced toward the stone marker. "Mr. Holloway, I told you to look up County Record 48. Did you?" I nodded. "Found everything. Federal documents, county memos, HOA correspondence. They've known for decades." Fletcher exhaled slowly. "There's someone you should talk to. Guy named Vernon Ashford. Used to be on the HOA board. He quit because he couldn't stomach what they were doing." I felt a spark of recognition. I found his resignation email in the archive. October 2003. Fletcher nodded. "He's still around. Lives about 15 miles from here." He pulled a notepad from his pocket, scribbled an address, and handed it to me. "If I were in your position, I'd want to hear what he has to say." I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. "Thanks." Fletcher nodded and walked back up the path. I stood there alone, the address burning in my pocket. Vernon Ashford, a man who had walked away because he couldn't be part of the lie. If he still had records, he could give me more than documents. He could give me testimony. I pulled out my phone and entered the address. 15.3 miles, 22 minutes. I walked back to my truck, started the engine, and pulled onto the road. In the rearview mirror, the lake shimmered one last time before the road curved away, its secrets finally at peace. 24 hours after the confrontation at the lake, I drove 15 miles out of town to find Vernon Ashford. The address led to a quiet street with modest single-story homes. Vernon's house was pale yellow with white trim and a small garden along the front walk. I parked and walked up. Before I could knock, the door opened. Vernon Ashford stood there, 74 years old, silver hair thinning, wearing a plaid flannel shirt. His eyes were sharp, watchful. He looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. "You must be the guy who bought the lake," he said. I nodded. "Grant Holloway." He stepped aside. "Come in. I've been expecting someone like you for 20 years." The inside was neat, almost Spartan. Vernon gestured toward the couch, and I sat at a. He settled into a worn armchair. "I saw the posts on the neighborhood group," he said. "People saying you're blocking the lake. Diane's calling you a land grabber. I knew it was only a matter of time." I set my folder on the coffee table. "I found your resignation email in the county archive. October 2003. You said you couldn't be part of what the board was doing." Vernon's jaw tightened. "That's right. I served as treasurer from 98 to 03. After a year, I started noticing things: fees for lake maintenance, lake access, insurance, cleanup costs. We were collecting thousands a year for a lake we didn't own." He leaned forward. "I asked Diane about it. She told me not to worry. Said the lake was community property, always had been. But I'm a numbers guy. I went to the county recorder and looked it up." Vernon paused. "No easement. Nothing. Just a private deed from 53. I brought it up at the board meeting, showed them the records. Diane said, 'Nobody cares. We've been using that lake for 40 years. As long as nobody complains, we are fine. I told her that wasn't how the law worked. She said the law was for people who get caught. I felt my hands tighten. Did anyone else push back? Vernon shook his head. One other person voted with me. Everyone else went along with Diane. He stood and pulled an accordion folder from a desk drawer. Inside were printed emails, board minutes, bank statements, handwritten notes. I kept copies of everything, he said. When I resigned, Diane threatened to sue me if I said anything publicly, so I kept quiet. But I kept the records. He pulled out an email dated March 2001, from Diane to the board. Subject line, County Notice Re, Lake Ownership. I read it aloud. The county sent notice regarding lake ownership. Council advises we have no legal standing. Recommend we ignore and continue access. No one will challenge us if we act like we own it. I looked up. She knew. They all knew. Vernon nodded. That's not the only one. He handed me another email from 2003, his reply to the board. We are lying to homeowners about lake ownership. County Council told us in '85 we have no claim. Our own lawyer told us the same in 2001. We are collecting fees under false pretenses. Someone will challenge this, and we will lose. Vernon's expression darkened. Diane called an emergency meeting, told the board I was being alarmist. They voted 6-2 to continue. I resigned the next day. He pulled out bank statements. These show over $50,000 collected between '98 and '03. We were charging people for access to someone else's property. I leaned back. This wasn't just a property dispute. It was fraud. Vernon, I said carefully, would you be willing to testify? He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Yes. I'm 74. I don't have anything left to lose. I've carried this for 20 years. It's time someone told the truth. I pulled out my phone. I need to call the county attorney. She's reviewing evidence I sent, but this changes everything. Vernon gestured toward the phone. Make the call. I dialed Claire Donovan. She picked up immediately. Mr. Holloway, are we still on for 2 o'clock? I glanced at my watch. 11:30. Yes, but I need to bring someone. Vernon Ashford, former HOA treasurer. He has documents proving the board knew they had no legal claim and continued anyway. There was a pause. Then Claire's voice came back, sharper. Bring him. Bring everything he has. This just became a fraud investigation. I hung up and looked at Vernon. We need to be at County Council at 2 o'clock. Can you come? He nodded. I'll drive myself. We gathered the documents, emails, minutes, bank statements, legal memos, into the accordion folder. As we worked, Vernon spoke quietly. I should have done this years ago. But I was scared. Scared of being sued, ostracized. He looked at me. You're not scared, are you? I thought about that. I'm careful. But no. I have the law on my side. Vernon smiled faintly. Most people only care about the law when it works in their favor. We finished packing, and Vernon walked me to the door. Thank you for finishing what I should have finished. I shook his hand. You're finishing it now. That's what matters. At 1:45, I pulled into the county administration building parking lot. Vernon was already there with the folder. We walked in together and were directed to the 3rd floor. Claire Donovan met us in the hallway. She was early 40s, dark hair pulled back, grey suit. Mr. Holloway, Mr. Ashford. Thank you for coming. She led us into a conference room. Let's see what you have. Vernon spread the documents across the table. Claire started going through them, her expression hardening with each page. After 10 minutes, she looked up. This is fraud. Clear, documented, intentional. They knew they had no claim. They were told by county council, by their own attorney, and they kept collecting fees anyway. She looked at me. With your permission, I'd like to forward this to the Sheriff's Department for criminal investigation. I didn't hesitate. Do it. Claire turned to Vernon. Are you prepared to give a formal statement under oath? Vernon nodded. I am. Claire made 2 calls, one to the Sheriff's Department, one to the county administrator. When she hung up, she looked at us. We are scheduling a public hearing. County Commission meeting, 3 weeks from today. Mr. Holloway, you will present your case. Mr. Ashford, you will testify. I'll present the county's legal opinion. This will be public, live-streamed. Are you both ready? I glanced at Vernon. He nodded. I turned back. We are ready. Claire stood. Good. Because once this goes public, the HOA will fight back. They'll hire lawyers, try to discredit you. You need to be prepared. I thought about Diane's face at the lake, Russell's reaction when he realized she hadn't told him everything. Let them fight, I said. I have the truth. Claire smiled faintly. The truth and the law. That's a good combination. As we left, Vernon stopped on the steps. You know what's going to happen, don't you? When this goes public, half the neighborhood will hate you. They'll say you're destroying their community. I nodded. I know. Vernon looked at me. And you're okay with that? I thought about the CR-48 marker, the federal documents, the 147 pages of proof. I didn't destroy their community, I said. Their leaders did. I'm just making sure everyone knows it. Vernon nodded slowly. Then let's make sure they know. He walked to his car, and I walked to mine. 2 weeks until the public hearing. 2 weeks until everything came out. I started the engine and pulled out. My phone buzzed. New email. Subject line, Notice of intent to file federal lawsuit from Russell Blackwell. Formal, threatening. Exactly what Claire predicted. They were escalating. Good. So was I. 7 days after Russell Blackwell sent the lawsuit threat, I stood in the parking lot of County Hall at 6:30 in the evening, watching cars fill every space. The building was a 3-story brick structure with a main chamber that could seat 200. By the time I walked through the front doors, the lobby was crowded. Families, retirees, homeowners in matching blue HOA shirts, reporters with cameras. I carried a laptop bag, a remote control, and a folder containing 147 pages of documents. Claire Donovan met me near the entrance. Ready? She asked. I nodded. Where's Vernon? She gestured toward the front row. Already inside. The chamber was filling fast. 5 county commissioners sat behind a raised wooden bench. A projector screen hung on the wall behind them. I spotted Vernon in the front row, hands folded. Diane Pritchard sat opposite, Russell Blackwell flanked by 40 people in blue shirts holding signs, Save Our Lake, Community Rights Matter. I took a seat in the second row, set my bag down, and pulled out my laptop. At 7 o'clock, Commissioner Lydia Vaughan tapped the microphone. Good evening. This special session is now in order. We are here to address a dispute regarding Old Mill Lake. We'll hear from the HOA first, then Mr. Holloway. County Council will provide legal analysis. Let's keep this civil. She looked at Diane. Ms. Pritchard, you have 15 minutes. Diane stood and walked to the microphone. Russell followed with a laptop. Commissioners, thank you for hearing us. For 40 years, Old Mill Lake has been the heart of our community. Families have fished there. Children learned to swim there. We've maintained it, cared for it. Now Mr. Holloway wants to take it away based on a deed from a bank that never cared about this lake the way we do. She paused. We are not disputing that Mr. Holloway has a deed. We are asserting our rights under prescriptive easement. Decades of continuous use. That's the law. Russell activated the projector. The screen showed photos of families at the lake, testimonials from homeowners, and slides outlining prescriptive easement case law. It was polished, professional, and ignored the one fact that mattered most. Russell spoke, his voice calm. Continuous use over the statutory period establishes easement rights even without formal recording. The lake has been treated as community property for over 4 decades. Commissioner Vaughan leaned forward. Mr. Blackwell, did the HOA ever attempt to record an easement? Russell hesitated. We relied on common practice and historical precedent. Recording wasn't deemed necessary. Vaughan's expression didn't change. That's not a yes. Russell's jaw tightened. We did not record an easement. But that doesn't negate prescriptive use. Vaughan sat back. We'll hear from Mr. Holloway now. I stood, picked up my laptop, and walked to the microphone. The room went silent. I connected the laptop to the projector and looked at the commissioners. Thank you, commissioners. I'm not here to take anything from anyone. I'm here to restore legal clarity. I clicked the remote. The screen showed a timeline from 1948 to 2025. In 1948, Old Mill Lake was designated as a federal emergency water reserve. In 52, the project was cancelled and the lake transferred to county ownership with explicit instructions. I clicked. A federal memo appeared, the key line highlighted, "No public easement unless recorded with the county recorder." The federal government was clear. No public access without a recorded agreement. I clicked to the next slide, showing the 1953 deed. The county sold the lake under the same condition. Private ownership. No public easement unless recorded. I paused. Now let's talk about the HOA. The next slide showed the first letter from the HOA to the county, dated 1975, requesting easement recognition. Below it, the county's response: no easement exists. The property is privately owned. I advanced through a series of slides, each showing an HOA request and county denial. 75, 83, 92, 2001. Every time, the county said no. By 85, County Council sent this memo. The screen showed a document with the county seal. I read aloud, "HOA claims of prescriptive easement are without merit. Property has maintained continuous private ownership. No public access authorized." I looked at Diane. "You were told in writing that you had no claim, and you kept using the lake." The next slide was the email from March 2001, Diane to the board. I read it slowly. The county sent notice regarding lake ownership. Council advises we have no legal standing. Recommend we ignore and continue access. No one will challenge us if we act like we own it. The room erupted. Gasps, muttered exclamations. Someone shouted, "Is that real?" Vaughn banged her gavel. "Order. Let him finish." I clicked to the next slide. Board meeting minutes from 2003. Motion to authorize legal funds to defend lake access. The note says, "Legal counsel advise claim is weak. Board overruled." I clicked again. Vernon's resignation email appeared. "This is from Vernon Ashford, former treasurer, October 2003. We are lying to homeowners about lake ownership. Someone will challenge this, and we will lose." I turned off the projector. I have federal documents proving this lake was never public. County memos proving the HOA was told repeatedly they had no claim. Internal emails proving the board knew they were wrong. And a former board member willing to testify. I pulled out a folded paper. State Code 184.32. Easement requires recorded agreement. Unrecorded claims are void. I set the paper down. The HOA has photos and memories. I have the law. Vernon stood and walked to the microphone, hands trembling. "My name is Vernon Ashford. I was treasurer from 98 to 03. Everything Mr. Holloway showed you is true. We knew the lake wasn't ours. Diane and the board decided to act like we owned it. I resigned because I couldn't be part of the lie." Diane stood abruptly, face red. "This is ridiculous. We've been there for decades. This is our lake." Vaughn banged her gavel. "Ms. Pritchard, sit down." Diane didn't sit. "You're going to believe him over the entire community." Vaughn's expression hardened. "I'm going to believe documented evidence, federal records, and county legal opinions. Do you have a recorded easement? Yes or no?" Diane looked at Russell. He stood slowly. "Commissioner, we intend to pursue this in federal court." Vaughn shook her head. "You can pursue whatever you want. But this commission's position is clear. Old Mill Lake is private property. The owner is Grant Holloway. No recorded easement exists." She looked at the other commissioners. All in favor. 4 hands went up. Motion carries, 5-0. The county will issue a cease and desist to the HOA, effective immediately. The room exploded. Some clapped, others shouted. Claire stepped to the microphone. "For the record, County Council has referred this to the Sheriff's Department for investigation into potential fraud. The HOA collected fees for lake maintenance on property they didn't own." Diane's face went white. She grabbed her bag and pushed toward the exit. Russell followed. Vaughn banged the gavel. This meeting is adjourned. The livestream counter showed 22,000 viewers. I walked over to Vernon. He sat with his head down, hands shaking. You did the right thing, I said. He looked up, eyes wet. I should have done it 20 years ago. I shook my head. You did it when it mattered most. Claire joined us. That was as clean a victory as I've ever seen. The HOA has no standing. I glanced at the crowd, some arguing, some filming. I didn't do this to be famous. Claire smiled faintly. No, you did it because it was right. But that doesn't mean people won't hate you for it. 72 hours after the county commission vote, the story went viral. County Tribune ran the headline, HOA fraud exposed, 20 years of illegal lake access. The article detailed everything: the federal documents, the county memos, the internal emails, Vernon's testimony. By noon, it had been shared over 50,000 times. Local TV stations picked it up. A legal blog called it a case study in recorded easements. My phone didn't stop buzzing. Most messages were from strangers, some supportive, some hostile. I ignored almost all of them. The one I didn't ignore came from Claire Donovan. Sheriff Merrick wants to meet. Today, 2 p.m. I drove to the sheriff's department. Sheriff Merrick met me at a conference room door. He looked tired. Mr. Holloway, he said, gesturing to a chair. Appreciate you coming in. I Saturday. He closed the door. I've spent 3 days reviewing everything County Council sent. The emails, bank statements, board minutes. I also spoke with Vernon Ashford. He paused. This is bad. I waited. Merrick continued. We are opening a criminal investigation. Fraud for lying to homeowners and collecting fees under false pretenses. Misappropriation of funds. Trespass. Destruction of property based on your videos. Diane Pritchard is the primary target. The rest of the board during that period is also under scrutiny. He slid a folder toward me. I need your full statement. Timeline, documents, videos, communications. I spent the next hour walking Merrick through everything. He took notes and recorded with my permission. When I finished, he set his pen down. You did everything right. That's why this case is airtight. He stood. We'll be interviewing board members. If charges are filed, you'll be notified. I stood. I'm ready. My phone buzzed. Text from Claire. County Treasurer froze HOA accounts pending investigation. The next morning, another headline. HOA board faces criminal probe. Accounts frozen. A Facebook group formed. Willow Creek HOA accountability. Over 300 members within 6 hours. Someone posted a petition for Diane's resignation. Within 24 hours, 142 signatures. That evening, the HOA held an emergency meeting. Vernon told me 150 homeowners showed up. Diane tried to defend herself. Someone read the 2001 email aloud. Russell Blackwell stood from the back. I was misled by my client. I can't continue representation. He walked out. At the end, a vote of no confidence. 135-7 to remove Diane. Diane Pritchard was out. The next day, the county engineer verified the stone marker. Dr. Helen Cross examined it for 20 minutes. This is authentic. This marker has been here since '48. She handed me a report. We'll file this with the county. Over the next week, media coverage intensified. The state attorney general announced a statewide investigation into HOA financial practices. My case had become a precedent. Then, 10 days after the public meeting, I got an email from Commissioner Vaughn. Subject: Proposal for public access. The county would like to propose creating a formal recorded public access easement. The county would maintain infrastructure and grant you a property tax credit. I called Claire. Did you see the county's proposal? She had. It's a good deal. You'd keep ownership. The public gets access. The HOA has no claim. I thought about the families who'd fished there for years without knowing they were trespassing. They'd been lied to. Set up the meeting, I said. 2 days later, I sat with Commissioner Vaughn, Claire, and a county attorney named Paul Garrison. They presented the terms, recorded easement, public access from County Road, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. County would install gate, signage, parking. HOA would have no authority. County covers all costs in exchange for property tax credit. I asked one question. The easement gets recorded. Paul nodded. Recorded. Filed. Publicly accessible. No ambiguity. I looked at Claire. She nodded. I looked at Vaughn. I agree. We signed that afternoon. The easement was recorded within 48 hours. For the first time in 70 years, Old Mill Lake had a legal, transparent, recorded public access agreement. It was over. Or at least the fighting was. What came next was something quieter. Restoration, maybe. Or just the absence of noise. 30 days after the county commission vote, I stood at the edge of Old Mill Lake watching a construction crew install a gate at the new public access point. The gate was galvanized steel with a sign mounted at eye level. Old Mill Lake, public access authorized county easement recorded 20-25 hours, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. entry via County Road 14 only. At the bottom, private property owner, Grant Holloway. The foreman walked over. Gates operational. Parking lot will be finished by next week. Path gets graded and topped with crushed stone. Ready for opening in 10 days. I nodded. Looks good. My phone buzzed. Text from Claire. County scheduling public opening ceremony. April 15th, Commissioner Vaughn wants you there. I typed back, I'll be there. The ceremony was at 2 o'clock on a Saturday. Over 200 people stood near the gate. Commissioner Vaughn stood at a podium. Claire and Vernon were there too. Vaughn tapped the microphone. Today marks the official opening of public access to Old Mill Lake under a recorded county easement. She gestured toward me. Mr. Holloway purchased this property legally and discovered no easement had been recorded. Rather than closing access, he worked with the county to establish a formal easement. This is how property rights and public good can coexist, through law, respect, and generosity. She paused. The previous HOA leadership misled homeowners for years. Mr. Holloway didn't create this problem. He exposed it and helped solve it. There was scattered applause. The county has installed infrastructure. The HOA has no authority here. This is public land now, legally and transparently. She looked at me. Mr. Holloway, would you like to say anything? I walked to the podium. I didn't buy this lake to take it away from anyone. When I found out the HOA had been using it without legal standing, I could have locked it down. But that didn't feel right. I glanced at Vernon. A lot of you were lied to by people you trusted. That wasn't your fault. This easement isn't charity. It's the right thing to do. Now it's private property with public access, legally recorded. Nobody has to wonder if they're trespassing. Vaughn returned. The gate is now open. She cut a ceremonial ribbon, and people walked through. I stayed near the parking lot, watching. Families walked to the water. Kids ran ahead. A man set up a folding chair and cast a fishing line. An older woman stood near the stone marker, reading the CR48 carving. She looked at me and nodded. I nodded back. Vernon walked over. You did good, he said quietly. We both did, I replied. He looked at the people along the shore. 20 years ago, I thought if I kept quiet, it would go away. I was wrong. Sometimes the only way to fix something is to break it open. We stood in silence, watching the lake come back to life, legally, this time, without the shadow of a lie. Over the next few weeks, life settled. The lake got regular use. A park ranger stopped by twice a week. No incidents. Diane Pritchard never showed up. Vernon said she'd moved. The new HOA board issued a public apology, refunded fees, and committed to transparency. The sheriff's department forwarded the case to the district attorney. Claire said charges were likely. 3 months later, I drove to the lake on a quiet Tuesday. The parking lot was half full. A family was picnicking. 2 teenagers were fishing. An elderly couple sat on a bench, talking. I walked to the stone marker. The CR48 carving was sharp and clear, preserved and protected. I crouched and ran my hand over the letters carved 77 years ago. I stood and looked at the water. It wasn't beautiful in the postcard sense, but it was real. A voice behind me said, Mr. Holloway. The man from the opening ceremony approached. I just wanted to say thank you. I've been coming here since I was a kid. When I heard you bought it, I thought it was over. But you didn't have to do what you did. I nodded. It wasn't mine to keep from people. It was mine to protect. There's a difference. He smiled faintly. Yeah, there is. I thought about Diane shouting that I'd stolen their lake, Fletcher recognizing the marker, Vernon handing me emails he'd kept for 20 years, Claire presenting evidence, Vaughan voting 5-0, Russell walking out because his client had lied. Justice didn't look like revenge. It looked like a gate, a sign, and a family by the water. I walked to my truck and sat behind the wheel. The folder of documents was in the back seat, thinner now. I didn't need it anymore. I started the engine and pulled onto the road. In the rearview mirror, the gate stood open, the sign reflecting the light. Public access authorized. County easement recorded. 2025. I turned onto the main road and drove home. The noise was gone. The fight was over. What remained was silence, the kind that comes after the truth has been told and there's nothing left to argue about. Justice isn't about winning. It's about the silence after the noise. And that silence was the sound of something finally being right. Thanks for watching HOA Havoc Stories. Share this video with someone who loves a good plot twist. And don't forget to subscribe.